I lied. Well, I didn't lie exactly, but I didn't give the most information as it pertains to what is absolutely happening with the US dollar. And this video is going to be pretty dynamic because first I'm going to give you the biggest update for BRICS right now in real time based on the research that I've done within the last few days. And then at the end of the video, if you're in the US or you hold the majority of your investments in US dollars, I'm gonna tell you what this means for you. So let's jump into it. But first, let me introduce myself. My name is Ashley. On my channel, Ashley in Africa, I talk about my experience living, moving, and doing business here on the continent of Africa. I created the Africa Investors Academy, a community of entrepreneurs, aspiring entrepreneurs, and investors who want to do business here on the continent and grow their investments to ultimately retire early. And how it's turning out is really to diversify yourself in this global economy that we are now living in. So if this information is helpful and it sounds interesting to you, please be sure to like the channel, like this video, and subscribe to the channel. And welcome back to our family as we continue to grow. All right, let's jump into it. I've got some notes. So I did a video a couple weeks back about the bank collapse. And I said, hey, I don't think this is really, the demise of the US economy. And that part I didn't lie about because essentially the US has been demising its own economy for decades now. And the bank collapse is just a sign of what is happening around the decisions that the US is making. And this is dependent upon what I'm sharing, but it's interdependent, but it's America, right? And the US has been doing a lot of things over our entire lifetime and is known as the biggest, essentially geopolitical bully in our history, in our time. As an American, I can say this consciously, embarrassingly, of course, but this is facts, this is reality, this is historic, and the challenge is sometimes living in the US, we are taught American imperialism, so we don't get the full picture. But I digress. I want to jump into the BRICS update and let you know exactly what is happening around the de-dollarization of the global economy. All right, so BRICS, for those that are not familiar, BRICS is an economic conglomerate comprised of or founded by 5 specific countries: Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. This is the original BRICS conglomerate. BRICS is also known as BRICS Plus currently, with new countries a part of the system, including so many. I'm going to get into that later, but BRICS Plus essentially is a thing. And today, the BRICS GDP has surpassed the US GDP, or excuse me, the G7 GDP. And so the G7 is the economic conglomerate of the US, Canada, France, Germany, Italy, and the UK, as well as the EU. What does this mean when the GDP surpasses this powerhouse known as the G7? Well, this is a huge shift in the global change that is taking place. And so obviously the G7 trades and operates in US dollars, as have most of the world, for the last, 60 years since World War II. And that has stopped, and it has been happening for the last few years. China is now known as the most powerful economy in the world, right? Whether or not they're sharing that information, and they have created their own digital currency. They have created it. And this digital currency is the currency that the BRICS conglomerate is looking to adopt. Well, I'm going to talk a little bit more about this, but how are they doing this, right? So as the first country creating this digital currency, it is allowing them and has allowed them to trade commodities without using the dollar. It's been happening. It's literally been happening. I even saw here in in Africa, on the continent. Tanzania and I think India are trading with their local currencies in the rupees and the Tanzanian shilling. And so it begins. Now, the de-dollarization has already happened as well in Russia when the US placed sanctions on Russia, removing them from the SWIFT system, requiring Russia to operate in its own currency. And they are still doing that. Like, they've been trading, they've been operating in commerce and things. Their economy hasn't stagnated. It had a drop, of course, just with a lot of the geopolitical drama. But essentially, Russia's economy is still operating. It is still, it is still a part of this GDP of the BRICS economy that has surpassed the G7's economy. And it's a huge leader in that economy. All right. And so what additionally does this look like? Well, countries tend to adopt and receive US aid. It comes with countries now saying, hey, not only are we not going to trade in US dollars, but we're not going to accept aid in US dollars. And foreign aid has always been an opportunity for a foreign country to come in and say, we're going to give you this for this, essentially a quid pro quo. And the US has been doing this for years, thus allowing it to have certain relationship dynamics and receiving minerals and resources from said countries. I'm going to link a few podcasts and interviews below so that you can also get information on what I'm sharing, because this is just not me coming and sharing this information. This is me doing my research from global analysts, global economists, US economists that are like former US government leaders that are sitting back looking and saying, what have we done? So if this is helpful, and this is resonating, stay tuned and like this video. Share it with someone else who would find value in it as well. So now let's talk about these new countries with interest, right? So one of the biggest news breakers a couple weeks ago was that Mexico was showing interest in joining the BRICS conglomerate, the BRICS alliance. Mexico is considering breaking their CUMA agreement, which is the Canada-USA-Mexico agreement, because of the decline in diplomatic trust between the US and Mexico. If you're in the US, I'm sure you feel this tension, and the tension that has been happening over the wall, over the borders, over the separation of children and family, over the media frenzy, the conspiracy theories, the chaos that has been happening between the US and Mexico over the last few years. And Mexico has expressed a huge interest. Other countries looking at the BRICS conglomerate include Jamaica, Costa Rica, El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, Panama, Bolivia, Chile, Cuba, Ecuador, Peru, Uruguay, Venezuela, Mongolia, Pakistan, Uzbekistan, Sri Lanka, and the list goes on and on and on and on. The countries that are expressing interest, this is huge, right? Because these are countries that express interest. And while there is a full process and onboarding that happens for countries to actually express interest, apply, and be onboarded, the list is growing. And the countries that are in that process are doing so. Why? Because they have valuable resources and minerals, specifically commodities that can be contributed into this global economic system and monitored through a ledger that creates a level of transparency and global integration, global support, also known as the blockchain. All right. So, their structural changes are essentially desirable now, right? Nobody wants to work with the central banking system of the United States of America. They see our American dollar as paper mache, like fake money. It no longer is backed by a commodity that is of value. America no longer produces goods of value. And essentially, we're asking countries with the most resources to use our money while we put sanctions and we bully people who don't do what we want to do, thus what we've always done. And so countries that have these high value commodities like gas, oil, gold, even crops, high value crops, are essentially saying we're going to trade in our local currency. You know, Saudi Arabia was one of the main people that had an interest. Oh, and I didn't even mention that I've also heard that Nigeria had an interest, one of the biggest oil producers on the continent. And so this is getting really, really, really interesting. It's getting really interesting. And so let's get into what this means for the US. All right. I also want to say that the new development bank is kind of the structure, right? So going from the central banking system, the SWIFT banking system, the new development bank is essentially the banking system that is creating a global activity of developing the world, right? With this shared commodity, shared interest of globalization. And it seems to just be a group of people who have shared interest in doing business globally, but they don't want to deal with the intermediaries and the bullying tactics that we have carried as Americans our entire independence. And there's actually one here in South Africa, in Sandton, South Africa, a new development bank. So I do a little bit more research on that, and stay tuned for a video to follow. But let's get into what this means for people in the US and what this means for people that hold majority or all of their assets in US dollars. First, want to say diversify. Now, hopefully this means humility, right? Hopefully this means humility, because the US dollar is no longer going to be as valuable as it has been. And the US needs to figure out a strategic plan to get along with the get on. Get along with the get along, as my grandfather would say. Because it's not looking good. The US is in over $3.1 US trillion of debt on its own. This is the paper money that is created. Its own debt. The foreign debt is not even very clear. We don't even know those numbers. They're very elusive. But in addition to that 3.1 trillion debt, which is also the historical high debt amount for any country in the world, there's also the 38 trillion of unfunded Medicare liabilities and 17 trillion of unfunded Social Security that they're talking about, moving around. Now, my thoughts are, if you live in the US and you're only operating in US dollar, you're going to continue to see commodities raise. But I'm going to tell you what a couple of different people had to say, and I'm going to link those videos below as well. So Paul Craig Roberts, he is the US economist and former US government employee that worked under a specific president. I don't want to quote him, but check him out below. And he's basically saying that, with the consistent interest rates increasing, more banks will fail, especially regional banks, credit unions, those that are invested in these low interest bonds that are no longer worth anything with the high interest rate. If there are things that are invested in those US treasuries or bonds, those banks are going to fail. Our favorite representative, Marjorie Greene, she's always saying the wild stuff, She's got some interesting predictions over on her Twitter. So you can go and check those out if you're interested. But this is what she said, and I quote, "The US dollar will be replaced. It will plunge Americans into economic woes never seen before in our entire history. America will never recover." John Rivoli is a political analyst, and he is an American political analyst who is quoted by saying, "My country is the most destructive geopolitical actor in the world for the past 20 years. I'd say maybe a bit longer than that. No one will dispute that. From a business point of view, why would you want to invest in the US? It's a bad investment. It is a horrible bet, the United States. The United States are unrepented. The United States is hopeless. It's a hopeless case, and this rise in the global BRICS system will be great for the global economy." That's a lot, right? Well, this is what the global analysts, the US economists, and foreign economists are saying. Meanwhile, they've got Americans over there fighting over, you know, the Green Deal and all of the things. I don't know what we're fighting about now as Americans, but we're not paying attention to what is happening from a global perspective. So I do not give financial advice. I do only share my perspective and my experience. But if you are living in America and you have all of your assets in US dollar, you could potentially fall fate to what some of these analysts and representatives have shared. How do you change that? You diversify yourself. Get your passport, explore the world while you still can, and see if there are opportunities outside of the US that are interesting to you. Investing in land, investing in commodities, investing in assets and crops, high value crops that are going to see and help you see a long-term return on your money, and just getting out of the chaos that is known as my home country, the US. The United States of America. I've got plenty of resources that I share on my website, ashleyinafrika.com. If you have an interest in moving, expanding your business abroad, check the links below. I'd love to work with you and support you on your journey. But until the next video, I'll see you soon.